Welcome to a football show, Thursday edition here on the 440 Sports Network. That is not Zach Lyons. That is Paul Kuharsky of paulkuharsky.com. That is the website. Sign up and subscribe. My name is Braden Gall. Good to be here with you guys. Of course, brought to you by our great and amazing, wonderful local sponsors, Sinkers Beverages and the Kingston Group. We'll tell you guys about them coming up in just a second. PK, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
I'm well. Thanks for having me. Handsomeness upgrade here with Zach out and me in. You're welcome for that.
Look, I'll give you that one, but he does have more hair. So
the hair thing is not in anybody's control, nor is the handsomeness thing. It's
true. That's
genetics.
True.
I know everyone out there is keeping a close eye on Columbia versus Ohio State in tennis. The Lions at 8 taking on number 1 seeded Ohio State in the tennis tournament. This is, if you went to a school like Columbia, you're not going to beat Ohio State at big sports, but at a sport like tennis, you got a fair shot. So bring it on.
I was going to ask you what you thought about Nashville SC firing Gary Smith today as a big soccer fan, but no, we could go college tennis if you'd prefer. I think
that's the extent of it. I mean, we're hanging tough with them right now. So I've got the app loaded.
All right, so today, obviously, NFL schedule released last night. We knew all the names. We knew all the games. Now we sort of know when they're going to be laid out, how they're going to function. We'll get to what that actually means, some of the teams they're going to face, where they're going to face them in the schedule, AFC South backloaded, rookie quarterbacks, lots of interesting stuff there, and sort of what a schedule actually can do to a team's outlook on a season, so we'll get into that. But also, I think I want to spend some time sort of looking at one of the things that struck me listening to all of the coaches and sort of some of the players and, watching Will Levis take the press conference dais last week and then mini camp is just how different top to bottom the organization is. And this organization has gone through some changes in the past, but I want your perspective on how do you know what moves have worked? How do you know what the culture actually is? And is this, a time in which players are different than they've ever been before? Training is different. Knowledge is different. Data is different than ever before in this league. So just how different this team is and how a reporter like you will go about trying to sift through all of that newness and figure out what's actually working. So we'll have a couple of big conversations today on the show. Sinkers Beverages, of course, your great and amazing local liquor store. If you search Uber Eats, they will deliver the booze directly to your house. Paul, if you do that, they will drive the booze so that you can do the drinking. That's what you do. It's
nice deal.
Yeah. There's a couple of former coordinators that could use that. Sinkers Beverages, of course, in East Nashville. Their sister store, Bluegrass, up in Hendersonville. They, I believe, are the 3-time defending liquor store of the year in Nashville for a reason, and they make this product free for you every single Monday and Thursday because they support you guys. So you should support them. Kingston Group, buildkg.com. You guys know the deal. If you have a home in this market, which is probably expensive, and you're going to do something to it, remodel it, renovate it, buy it, or sell it, make sure you talk to the Kingston Group. Those folks will take care of you. Nose to tail operation. Great people. Again, locally owned, custom home, award-winning design firm. So they'll take care of you there. And I know if you are a subscriber to the Paul Kuharsky podcast, which of course all of you should be, and if you want to get into the comment section, we absolutely will take some questions from you guys. But if you are going to place a wager, perhaps on the Titans plus 4.5, against the Chicago Bears, a 4.5-point underdog in week 1 against the rookie quarterback and the number 1 overall pick, the worst record in the sport. Where should they place those bets, Paul Kuharsky?
They should place those bets at Zen Sports. You've got to live in Tennessee, so it's special for you. I have my handy coaster right here. But if you go to Zen Sports and you use the code TNPaul, bet as little as $10 and boom, you get a free membership to paulkuharsky.com if you somehow don't have one, a free year on them. And you can bet a lot more than $10 if you bet $1,000 up to on something plus 500 or less. No danger first wager. So you either stock up that account with huge funds or get a do-over on your first bet with no risk.
There you have it. Pays for itself. Right out of the gate. All right, so let's get to the NFL schedule release. Look, I find myself as I'm getting older that I care about it less going into it. And then it happens and I'm like, oh, here we go. And I kind of get into looking at where it's all laid out. I get interested in road trips. I get interested in blocks of the schedule. But I want to start with a broader question first, which is at this time of the year or even in the preseason, it's flawed to analyze the schedules in almost any way. Last year's playoff teams, Vegas odds on who's going to win the Super Bowl, winning percentage from last year. You can do it if you want to, but it seems very flawed. How much does a schedule actually impact the wins and losses that the Tennessee Titans or any team will have in 2024? In your opinion?
Well, it impacts it, but not on anything that we know about right now. Who's hurt when during the course of the season? You get Aaron Rodgers week 2. Well, he's likely to be healthy in week 2, though we figured that last year. He's more likely to be healthy in week 2 than he is in week 14. So, you'd rather have drawn the Jets in week 14. It's about injuries and hot streaks and cold streaks for teams as they come along. So only during the season and really, well into the season, you say, hey, Titans drew the Bears. It's a good time to draw the Bears, clearly, Caleb Williams' first start. But only later can you say, hey, that was a good time. It was good that they didn't get the Bengals until late in the season, or it was good, that they went to Los Angeles when they did to see the Chargers and things like that. You don't really know. A couple things about the schedule that I've come to find more interesting as things have gone on, and this is largely based on Warren Sharp, a good NFL analyst who really focuses on these things. I think the best thing to look at as a predictor is not strength of schedule, which is based on last year. Well, I mean, if you're a Titans fan, you think the Titans are a lot better this year than last year. So people are computing their strength of schedule, thinking the Titans are an easy game this year. Well, you don't think the Titans are an easy game this year. So strength of schedule to you shouldn't mean that much the way it's based. He bases it on the Vegas over-under win totals, which are more predictive of what people in the financial know, expect teams to do this year. So I think that's a wiser way to look at it. And then you really look at if the schedule's favorable or not based on how often a team is playing on short rest and how often a team is seeing teams that are playing on short rest or playing on long rest. The Titans are playing no teams that are coming off a bye this year. And the Titans are playing no teams that are coming off a Thursday night mini bye this year. That's advantageous for them. And while many Titans fans are probably up in arms over the lack of prime time, the Titans play no short rest games because their one Monday night football game, they have a bye after it. So in that regard, I think Brian Callahan's probably pretty happy that 14 Sundays he's playing at noon. And the next week, guess what? All but one time he's playing at noon, except for that Monday when he's got an extra day's rest. And then, there are games at the end of the season, the one game at the end of the season where it's to be determined. It could be on a Saturday. It could be on a Sunday. But the Titans know they're going to be a well-rested team, and they're not going to see any teams with crazy rest, but they're also not going to see any teams with who are short rested either. So they're going to play a pretty, you could call it like a square schedule, which, is not a bad thing. Could be worse, could be better, could be worse. Probably, about as level as you could get it.
I think the bye is the perfect example of what you're talking about. Like the bye week, if it comes or it's coming early this time, it's going to be week 5. If it comes following a Monday night game, so in theory, off of a short week, that's fine. Okay, great. But the bye week could be extremely beneficial in week 5, or it could hurt you in week 5. It could be extremely beneficial that it be week 15, or it could hurt you. A couple years ago, when this team was the most injured in NFL history, it was. I think the bye came like right after a Buffalo game, maybe that was really big time, and it came at the right time. And so you just don't know when it's going to be valuable. And
right, but you want it, generally speaking, close to the middle of the season. And this is 2 years in a row where they haven't had it close to the middle of the season. So they're due for that. And that's one thing I guess you could complain about if you're really looking for something. Seems to me to be pretty spread out. It's division heavy late. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I think if the division is bad, AFC South could be, forgotten about late outside of whoever's winning it, which is likely to be Houston.
And if people aren't paying attention, I don't know. Like maybe that's a good thing for all the teams that are struggling at that point. They're not on. I don't know. Maybe they're not going to gain a lot of national notoriety no matter what they do, because that's not the way a younger, smaller market fan base works. But I've never heard of a team not, like you mentioned, they're not going to play anybody off a bye or a mini bye. I don't think I've ever heard of that, honestly. Like, I don't know every schedule ever made, but that seems extremely rare to not do that. I can't remember breaking down a Titans schedule in which that was the case, so I think you're lucky there. AFC South is interesting to me because I think it does tie into health and quarterback play. They will play Indianapolis in week 6 at home. They will not play a division opponent again until week 12. As you pointed out in your piece, paulkuharsky.com, they will play 5 out of 7 games on the road from week 7 to week 13, which includes that road trip to Houston in week 12, which then begins a stretch of games where they're going to play 5 divisional games in 7 weeks. And so if CJ Stroud is taking a step forward, those 2 games become incredibly difficult. If Anthony Richardson can't stay healthy, well, those games are not as difficult as we thought. And so last year we would have said W for Houston and Indianapolis, and they lost all 4 of them. So I don't know what you make. I love that the NFL wants to put the big divisional games at the end. In general, I think that was a good idea, whatever it was 15 years ago when they started doing that. But how do you analyze 5 out of 7 being in the division? Because that means the division could be there for the taking, even for a Titans team that may be flawed inherently.
I think I like it to be a little bit bottom heavy. I think this is too much. I don't like seeing the same teams too frequently. I hate when it's Titans at Houston, Titans against somebody, Houston at Titans 2 times in 3 weeks is terrible. Titans didn't get that this year. I'm happy for that. I think that should be outlawed by rule, and you shouldn't be able to. You got to, in teams where you play a rematch, you should see those teams at separate stages of the season because of the things we're talking about. A team in September and a team in December or January are 2 different teams. They can't spread them all out to that degree, but you could spread them out better. This is pretty well spread out. I think the Jaguars rematch has 3 weeks in between, and the other 2 are better spread out. Another thing this schedule tells us is the league doesn't think much of the Colts either, despite Anthony Richardson. Colts also only have 1 primetime game. I haven't looked at the rest and all of that stuff for them and if it's favorable or unfavorable. But the Colts are also a Sunday afternoon team through much of the season. Carolina has the worst schedule in the league in terms of that. They host the game against the Giants in Munich. Otherwise, nothing approaching prime time. Arizona has only 1. And I said
Vegas, I think.
And Vegas. And this, to me, is a big development because the Raiders have cachet no matter what. The Raiders are a national fan base team. So this gives me a little hope, Braden, that a team with national cachet that is not going to be good, doesn't look like it's going to be good, has questions at quarterback, has a first-year coach, has a lot of the same things that give teams give the league and the country doubt about the Tennessee Titans, who are not on big public display this year. And I think understandably so. And I know fans will give me a hard time about that. But the Raiders are similar to the Titans in that regard from a national 30,000-foot view. And that doesn't generally stop the NFL from putting the Raiders on 3 primetime games. And it has stopped them this year. So I think that's a notable development. It'll never happen for the Cowboys or the Packers or the Giants when they're bad. And we saw plenty of the Giants last year, though the Giants were coming off a decent season, so expectations were reasonable. But that the Raiders are only on 1 primetime game this coming season says that the league can acknowledge that a marquee team isn't worth showing off nationally at the beginning of the season in their eyes.
John says, this is the collab. I need it today. Ed says, too much is being made of getting rookie quarterbacks early. Yes, it is true their record isn't great, but does anyone think the Titans will be at their best early in the year? There's some factual problem with that comment, Ed, in that they only get 1 rookie quarterback early in the season. They get Caleb Williams in week number 1. They will play 4 first-round rookie quarterbacks, which, again, I don't think has ever happened. But they don't play the second one until New England in week 9, and then they play which is Drake May, and then they get J.J. McCarthy in week 11, and then, of course, they'll get Jaden Daniels on the road against Washington in week 13. So I think you could actually argue it's a good time to get Caleb. And, again, we have no idea how good these guys are going to be or what the health of the roster is going to be, but you're actually giving the entire rookie class of quarterbacks half a season to get ready to play the Titans. I would argue you would have preferred to have more of those games in the front.
I would agree. And it's absolutely better to get Caleb Williams week 1. You've got blitz packages and scheme wrinkles and things that he'll have no idea what's coming. Whoever got him in week 1 has that advantage. And, Will Levis doesn't have a great deal of experience. The Bears will have an advantage. Week 1 defenses have that advantage. They're not going to show things in the preseason. And the quarterback generally is going to, and the offensive coordinator are going to have to fly a little bit more blindly than they would with three games of film. So it's more advantageous against a young quarterback, and certainly a rookie quarterback starting his first game. Absolutely more advantageous.
And I know they're all very talented. That's why they get drafted in the top first 11 picks of the draft. But to put a quarter of your schedule against first-year players at the most important position in the game, that's the takeaway, is that you get full rookie quarterbacks. And again, the schedule was already made, so we knew this. But the fact that they all took quarterbacks in the first round is what makes it interesting. You're going to play 4, and you've got 4 more games with second-year quarterbacks, one of which is Anthony Richardson, who didn't play most of the season last year. So you're playing a lot of inexperience at quarterback.
And they also see some very good veteran quarterbacks. And
yes, they do.
Rodgers, Tua's getting there, Allen, Stafford, Herbert, who I'm still huge on, and Burrow, who I think is the star attraction in terms of what's coming to Nashville this season. That would be my number 1 ticket if I was buying for one Titans game.
I agree with you on that. There's not a lot of juice. I mean, the Packers game is always a big game, but like former coach Brian Callahan playing against his former team last year, Cincinnati's team at that stage would have been like without half their players.
Yeah.
And they weren't a good team. So they get a 4th place. This is supposed to be a 4th place schedule, but those 2 4th place teams in the AFC are Cincinnati and the Chargers. They are historically terrible against the Chargers out in California for whatever reason. And of course, Cincinnati carries all this extra stuff with it. So the Cincinnati game, I agree. And then Stroud at home at the end is probably another big one. But I mean,
you can see Stroud for a lot of years, though. I would put Rodgers second. Like it's the last time, presumably, that he'll be. I haven't looked at who they have division matchup with next year, but Rodgers isn't going to be here or around for a long time. So especially if you haven't seen him live.
Didn't even make it to week 2 last year either. So you just got to take advantage of your chances to watch Aaron Rodgers. That's for sure. Paul Kuharsky, of course, joining us here on A Football Show. Seekers Beverages, the Kinks Group. Sign up for a subscription, paulkuharsky.com. And of course, make sure you check out the Paul Kuharsky podcast as well. So from a strength standpoint, I want to go kind of the Warren Sharp direction here for a second. I looked at the odds, which is essentially your win-loss over-unders, right? The bottom 6 teams in the NFL, according to odds to win the Super Bowl. So I'm just going to use that as a benchmark. It's flawed because, as you'll see, the fact that the Bears are as high as they are is based on the size of their market and the brand and the number of people that care about them, not based on how good they are. So there is a little bit of, you kind of have to caveat it a little bit. But Arizona, the Giants, the Raiders, the Broncos, the Titans, the Patriots, and the Panthers are the bottom 6 teams according to Vegas. The Titans will play 1 game against the bottom 6 teams. That's not necessarily great, but they're not going to play the top 3, Kansas City, San Francisco, and Baltimore. And then Detroit's 4th, Buffalo's 5th, Cincinnati 6th, Houston 7th, Philly, Dallas, Green Bay. And then they play the Jets, the Dolphins, the Chargers, and the Bears. They will play 10 games, 2 against Houston. They'll play 10 games against what is right now by Vegas perceived to be the top 15 teams in the league.
I think Buffalo's high there, though they'd still be in the top 15. But would you have them 6th, 5th, 6th?
They're 5th on the according to Vegas. I would argue the Jets are inflated because of Rodgers in the market. I would argue that the Bears are inflated because of their high-profile nature and the market. So you can kind of knock them down a little bit.
The Bills are inflated based on what they've been.
Just how much they've lost over the last few years.
Yeah,
I agree with you on that. Yeah, 5th. Now that I'm looking at that, I don't. But again, Philadelphia and Dallas, they missed them, so that's good. So otherwise, I think you missed the 3 best teams, maybe the 2 best teams in the AFC. That's a positive. We already kind of knew that. So it's hard. I think my lesson in all of this is it's really interesting stuff. You got rookie quarterbacks. You got the bye weeks. You got the primetime stuff, which again we've beaten that horse to death. This is a smaller fan base in a smaller market. that doesn't have a lot of star power right now. Will Levis is going to attempt to change that with a rookie coach. There's just not a lot of gravitas to the brand right now from a national perspective. And so I think this should be it's manageable, but also could be very difficult. You just don't know.
Here's one for you. I've failed my sponsor, Primac, and by waiting too long to schedule flights the last couple of years, or only scheduling maybe the first half and waiting. So last night after I wrote, I scheduled the whole season. Hotels are no big deal, though you want to get into a good one, and Marriott's are cancelable up until 2 days before, and I'll keep an eye and can shift around and all of that. I'm actually doing a Sunday night comeback a couple times, which I never do, which will be a little bit of a challenge. But guess the two most expensive flights. This was incredibly shocking to me. One of them is a Southwest city, and I got knocked out off of Southwest. Southwest was so expensive, nearly twice as expensive as what I wound up on.
All right. I mean, I'm assuming Los Angeles has got to be one of them.
Two were more expensive than Los Angeles.
Really? Okay. All right. Is it because of how difficult it is? I mean, Buffalo doesn't strike me. Washington
was exorbitant.
All right. That's one. Can't be Indianapolis. Can't be Detroit. Miami?
No.
All right.
I must say, by the way, most of these flights were more reasonable than they've been the last couple of years. So I feel like the flights are coming back a little bit, which is good because they've been exorbitant. Flying in general has been exorbitant.
As the planes continue to break in midair.
Yeah, right. Yeah, they're lowering the price in exchange for your risk of death.
Right. All right. Well,
somebody's going to play this clip when I die on one of these flights.
What was number two?
Jacksonville is actually maybe the most expensive. Jacksonville on frigging Southwest was like $900. I think I'm connecting on Delta, and Delta is not my second airline. United is my second airline.
Oh, don't get me started on spring break trip this past year where you could not fly to any of the cities in Florida on that Saturday, the 9th, when the schools start in spring break.
And that's not even really holiday, right? I'm flying there the 28th of December and flying back the 30th. So, it's holiday time, but it's not prime holiday time.
It's in between the two, I guess. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Washington is interesting. Anyway, by the way, give your sponsor more love than just like a half a name there. Give him the full shout out.
Primac Mechanical, industrial heating and cooling.
There
if
you
you need their information, head to my site or email me, pkuharsky@gmail.com.
There you go. Marcus says the hotels in Nashville are straight crazy. I'm looking to go to the Titans and Vikings game. Marcus, I assume you are outside of the state, and if you're coming in for the Minnesota game, I do think that's a good one to come in for. Very winnable game potentially, although lots of interesting weapons. But yes, Nashville is not a cheap place to stay.
I'm not coming in to see Sam Darnold or JJ McCarthy. I think that's a bad game to come in for. I mean, come in for whatever you want, but that would be high on my list.
Well, to your point about sort of the brand value of the games, Green Bay is still a pretty good brand value there. The Jets are what they are with Rodgers, but New England's not what it was, and Minnesota is not what it was a couple of years ago, at least recently. So we'll see.
I'd put it ahead of a division game, and I'd put it ahead of the Patriots.
Chargers is the only game that's not scheduled at noon. So, yeah, I think one of the things that Brian Callahan will benefit from is consistency. It's one of the most important things in football, which kind of leads us right into another conversation. Unless you have anything else, that's week 7 through 13, 5 road trips, which includes Buffalo, Detroit, the Chargers, Houston, and Washington. That is Josh Allen, Jared Goff, Justin Herbert, and C.J. Stroud all on the road in like a 5 weeks period of time. That's a pretty brutal stretch that could define where this team is before they head into what is largely an AFC South final month.
And though I don't think Buffalo is going to be great, I still think they'll be good. And I think Buffalo, Detroit on the road back-to-back go a long way to telling us what the Titans are.
Titans being 30th from a Super Bowl odds perspective and win-loss record and being a 4.5-point underdog to the number 1 pick. Any of that surprise you at all? A little bit?
4.5 at Chicago surprised me a little bit, but a lot of time there. And that's just the kind of game the Titans historically kind of go win. then they'll come back against the Jets and Packers and have problems. Historically speaking, that's the way it would go.
Well, that's a perfect segue, because historically speaking, there are many things that we could say about this franchise, about the wide receiver room, about I already mentioned that they just, for whatever reason, cannot beat the Chargers in either San Diego or Los Angeles. You just mentioned they under Vrabel, they would have these get up for the big moment games against elite competition and win, and his defense was schemed very well against a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes, and then they would fall apart at home against a bad Giants team. So I want to start with the perspective of where this organization is now from top to bottom. And some of this is not just changes of the names, right? Like, they've changed GMs before. They've only changed owners once. They've changed head coaches a variety of times. But it seems like because we have a different type of athlete coming out of college today, just from a generational standpoint, we have a different type of approach to, I guess, health, both mental and physical. We have more data and science and analytics injected into every process with which NFL teams now function and operate. Do you think that in your time covering the team, which is every minute of it in Tennessee, do you think that there has been this much change from top to bottom in as short a period of time ever in the history of the organization?
Probably not, but a big part of that is because of the numbers involved. Every under Amy Adams Strunk, they are beefing things up continually. And so now Chad Brinker's into analytics. So they're got an analytics department that didn't used to exist. That's growing. Carthon is adding to the scouting department, which has never been huge, which, may or may not be part of the scouting issues. San Francisco doesn't have a giant scouting department and seems to do very well scouting. The scouting, the coaching staff continues to get bigger. They doubled the size of the strength and conditioning department, which I'm not getting used to the new title of. So things like that create an even bigger change because there are more people involved in it. So I think, Wisenhunt, Vrabel had, huge change coming in. This roster, last year's roster was 45% new. This roster may be more than 45% new. Coaching staff. This coach retained more of his predecessor's staff than Vrabel retained of Mularkey's staff. But I think if he did the total numbers based on the number of new people coming in the ways that I just mentioned, more newness than we've ever seen.
And package that with on the field, the most, like, Will Levis played last year, but he wasn't this, like, watching him do the opening press conference to minicamp, I was just struck by where's that Ryan guy? Like, Tannehill's out. And as a guy who's been, love him or hate him, Titans fans have lots of opinions about what he did. He's one of the more productive quarterbacks in franchise history. He stepped to the podium and took questions on most every time he was asked to, or took accountability, or was open and honest about stuff. And not seeing Derrick Henry, like, this is not just about the front office and the data and the analytics. It's about key players and key positions. Jeff Simmons and Amani Hooker, and I think I don't count MPF, but if you count Simmons and Amani Hooker and maybe Roger McCreary, I think those are the only 2 or 3 starters from 2 years ago. So
Harold Landry.
I guess Harold. That's true.
I think Harold Landry's the old hat on the team now. I think if you go with 3 wides and a 3-4 base, which is a mistake, you should probably go with nickel. But 11 of 22 starters right now are new, and that would be 12 if they sign a safety, which is one spot that they should still address to bump Elijah Molden down to more of a sub role. So that's dramatic change that was necessary because the roster was so plainly bad over the last 2 years, and the depth still is going to be an issue if they're hurt again. That's going to come up and bite them. And so, and I've referred to this several times, but I think it deserves it. Chad Brinker and I, when we talked at the owners' meetings, I asked kind of he and Carthon about their expectations for this year. And Brinker to him, and this is a very good point, said, about all of this newness, you've seen it sometimes gel quickly. And if it gels quickly, things can happen fast. But it doesn't necessarily gel quickly. There's a lot of change. And if it doesn't gel quickly, that doesn't make it a failure or mean that it won't gel. And if it doesn't gel as quickly as you hope or you wish for, then the results may not come as fast as everybody hopes for. And that's just part of the process. And I think that's completely reasonable. And I don't know if fans are pausing to consider it that way, but the organization certainly is. And I think that, again, that's completely reasonable.
How much new is Carthon this year? Obviously, we know when he was hired, and we know he was in charge last year as a general manager. There's still lots of I don't want to rehash the Vrabel Carthon communication behind the scenes stuff. That's just not, I think it's kind of played out. But how much are you looking at Ran Carthon as the new general manager this year, knowing full well that he's not?
Yeah, we don't really get to know. Too many people think well, he said he's thinking of it as his first draft, and still going back to this Ryan Cowden setting the board, which does not mean that Ryan Cowden ordered the board. I don't know how much you need us to chop it up into mashed carrots and feed it to you. Blake Bedingfield, who writes for me, set the board numerous times for the Titans. Nobody ever said Blake Bedingfield was acting as the GM. You know why? Because he wasn't ever acting as the GM. And because everybody understood, and some of Blake Bedingfield's days setting the board amounted to moving the magnetic nameplates up and down on the wall. Yep. Now it entails, typing things into a spreadsheet that's projected on the wall, or that, is on the TV screen on the wall, or whatever the technology is. But clearly Rand has more power now than he did, because he's the buck stops with him on personnel. So I'm not calling it his first draft, but it's certainly his first draft with ultimate power. I don't think he was crazy with that power by any means. But if and when we get to the point where we're saying who gets credit for Latham, or who gets dissed for Sweat, or whatever direction it goes, none of us should have any problem saying that it's Carthon, no matter who was of influence on the pick, because ultimately it will have been made by Carthon.
So, look, it's a meritocracy, the NFL. It is, perform or lose your job. That's just the nature of the game. And it's easy for us, outsiders, media, fans, etc., to evaluate the players. I do think we can have a separate conversation about Will Levis, because I think there's a chance you could see positive growth and steps forward from Will Levis and still not know if he's the $200 million quarterback, the Super Bowl championship caliber quarterback. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe you disagree, but it's easy to see the players. It's easy to look at a player and say, did his job, didn't do his job on any given play normally for fans and media. But with all this other stuff that we're talking about, like the injuries, unless someone can scientifically give me data that points to Mike Vrabel's practice style or lack of analytics department, which is all possible, how do you go about, again, I know we need time and we need games and we need weeks to do all this stuff, but how is it that you plan to go about evaluating the pieces that are behind closed doors, that the strength, the stuff that we don't fully always get a clear picture on, culture, communication, likability in the locker room? Like, how is it that you strategize with so much new? And we'll get to on the field, but like off the field stuff that we're talking about now in the offseason that they are working to put in place so that they do gel quicker. How do you quantify that if you're out there covering the team? And then what are you searching for?
Well, just watch, watch and listen. Hopefully you see some things that prompt some questions, or you have some questions that linger from what you saw last year. and you say, well, one just off the top of my head, stretch was John Stryker was Vrabel's earpiece on the analytical decisions on the quick stuff, the timeout. What's the clock breakdown here going to be in the next 3 minutes with the other team with the ball on a third down and whatever, and the Titans needing to get the ball back and drive for a field goal that'll tie it. Who's that guy this year, and how's that process work this year? Well, ultimately, we'll hope to have that conversation with Brian Callahan. I hope to have that conversation with Brian Callahan, not when he's at the podium, but we'll see. So that's an example. But otherwise, it's no different than anybody else in watching practices and seeing stuff. I mean, I thought you did a good job on the pod last week talking about the stretch, which, for a lot of people, they don't care. But will that stretch that we saw at the rookie practice be the stretch that happens for the entire team at a full practice? Not only was it a louder thing, and I think a more structured thing, though I think it was pretty structured in the past, just not as vocal. But now you've got 6 people strolling there and watching and maybe correcting or offering something as it goes on instead of 3 people. And maybe those 3 people weren't all dedicated there because a couple of them are off already starting rehab with somebody else. And that'll probably be the case with some of those 6 people. But I've also read, and I should have taken note about, another team whose stretch has gone to 18 minutes, which is ridiculously long use of time, or 16 minutes, whatever it was. It was a very long stretch period. So is that trending in the league, and how much can you get out of a long stretch, and what are they doing differently, and what kind of results can they see of that? Zach Woodfin, the new head of that department, was talking about, it's not just his department, but it's through everyone in terms of hydration and nutrition and all of those things in practice. Well, I mean, I think that Vrabel maybe took too much grief over practice. I mean, his late season practices were incredibly light.
Yeah.
All the time. People picture them out on Wednesday, like pounding each other, and say, well, his playing style is part of the reason why they beat up. Well, first off, everybody's playing style on Sunday in the league is physical. Finesse teams always get bad mouth. And who's finesse in the NFL anymore? Even if you're a finesse team, I mean, I think people would call the 49ers a finesse team.
Miami.
Yeah, right. But you think the guys up front in Miami aren't hitting, aren't sore on Monday mornings the same way guys up front in Nashville are? I mean, every coach in the league uses physical as one of his buzzwords. Yeah. Nobody's saying, well, what we're doing is trying not to be sore on Monday mornings and really kind of finesse it. Nobody's saying that.
We want to be real soft on Sunday.
Yeah, right. So, so we have to look and see, is there a noticeable difference in the way they practice, and how does that apply? I do think, much to people's chagrin, that a lot of the injury stuff, and I do think more science in it is great and all of that, but I think there's more of a share of bad luck involved in the Titans injury stuff over the last several years than people can comprehend. I mean, when Colton Dowell is running down the sideline on a special teams play, a double team, and ends up with a torn ACL from getting tangled up with those 2 guys, I don't know how strength and conditioning avoids that for him.
That was Mike Vrabel's fault. Come on now. Yeah. Derek says those guys up front in Miami are tougher than a $2 steak. That is our one $2 steak mention of the entire 2024 calendar year. I will not allow it ever again.
Hey,
I agree. I think
that's a point there. Look, we used to think, or, in a lot of ways we thought, well, Aaron Brewer is strictly a Titans guy. Nobody likes this guy except Keith Carter and Jason Hotenling and Mike Vrabel. And then he gets a pretty attractive contract from Miami. So, there's more to him than the Titans' love of him, which I too didn't understand. But here's another team that loves him and paid him.
All right, so this was not. I wasn't going to bring this up, but it just sort of hit me here because I think about. I'm very strange. I think about the Buffalo Bills Super Bowl window of the early '90s, and I think about how it's aged over time. And in the moment, as like a young kid watching the NFL, I was learning about the game and falling in love with the sport. And I was like, God, these Bills, man, they're terrible. Like Jim Kelly sucks. Like it's just, you're a kid and you're kind of watching the game. And now at my age, looking back on it, I almost am in awe of what they accomplished as an organization. But it took like 20 years for us to get to the point where we really do appreciate how much that those four teams accomplished, despite never doing the ultimate thing. And I'm curious how you feel about Tannehill. I think Henry's legacy is pretty solid and stable. It's never going to go anywhere. I think he's one of the greatest running backs of our era, whatever that means. And I'm curious about Ryan Tannehill, about Mike Vrabel, John Robinson. Like, there's plenty of stuff to criticize. There's reasons they're not here, right? Like, it's not complicated. But I wonder how their legacies age over time, 10 years from now. And I know you've talked about Tannehill maybe catching a little too much flack from the fan base, but I'm just like, they were still some of the best years of Titans football that I can remember. And
yeah,
so
it was a little too short, right? Tannehill's tenure was a little too short. If he did that for another couple regular seasons, he's still going to have the stigma of not having produced in the playoffs. But this idea, like, if you don't do it in the playoffs, you weren't any good, is just crazy. I mean, things happen in the playoffs a lot of times. Are these Bills not good because they haven't done it in the playoffs? I mean, they had some classic games with Kansas City.
It might be Mahomes' fault,
Are classic games, and I don't think that diminishes that the Bills have been one of the best teams in the league in the last 5 years and incredibly great to watch, particularly in the playoffs. So this idea that because he didn't get it done in the playoffs, he wasn't good is crazy. So Mariota gets huge credit for getting them out of 2-win and 3-win seasons. Oh, this guy brought us back from terrible places. But Tannehill getting them to the number 1 seed in the AFC South, but then blowing it against Cincinnati. He didn't get any credit. He sucks. Yeah. It's just the sliding scale of your likability is crazy to me. I mean, Robinson, I'm going to write about this maybe as soon as today, but just have to be more allowance for the middle. You either have to love somebody or hate somebody. So that's what's going on with Rand now. Things look good for Rand. We're giving him chef hats and saying, let him cook. Well, do you learn nothing from in J-Rob we trust? Just wait a little bit. See what his guys do. Sweat's like a boomy or busty kind of player. There's a lot of reason for us to be encouraged. But can we wait and see? Or do we have to give Rand some kind of championship belt or crown on the fact that he drafted a guy that looks promising? Cedric Gray made a lot of plays in college, but you're counting on a 4th-round pick to be kind of the central figure in your defense. It doesn't look like enough for me. I'm going to need to see it, and that's all right. That's okay. We don't have to crown Rand Carthon fantastic or terrible right now. We can say a lot of this looks very interesting. They did very well in free agency, but the team that does very well in free agency usually somehow winds up not looking that good during the season. So that makes me a little nervous, and I'm going to have to wait and see how it unfolds. And I think that's how people should look at it, but nobody wants to look at it.
No, win right now. Also, I think college coaches are doing this now in recruiting where they're like, we're not just going to go buy everything on the table to make our team better. We've got to buy the right people. We've got to, it's recruiting has turned into free agency in college football, and a lot of coaches are catching hell. But the best coaches, Jim Harbaugh, Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, these guys, they do it the way the NFL teams do it, which is build through development in the draft and then supplement with pieces in free agency that make you better. I think in the short term on a bad roster and with a ton of cap space and a young quarterback, go for it. Like, what do you have to lose at that point? And because you have to do this for the Hall of Fame, like you physically have to put yourself back into an era and like reevaluate a thing that you probably, the last thing you saw probably wasn't as good as it was when it, was Hall of Fame worthy. I think that helps probably your perspective on doing that. But
sometimes
I just think the Bills thing always stands out to me as like how I looked at them one way, and now how I view them in a totally different, more irreverent light than anything else. But that brings us to Levis, which I just want to get your thoughts on this, because I've asked a lot of people this, and we've talked about it a lot on the show, and that is is there a chance, and maybe you'll just disagree with me on this. I think there is a chance, because you're talking about the middle. I think there's a really good chance this is a middle season, relatively speaking, for Will Levis. He shows progress. He shows growth. He starts most of the games. Maybe he misses one or two for injury. There's not a major question that he answers, but not a major question that is created by him, that he sort of just shows moderate improvement and progress. And I don't know if that gives people the answers that they want about him or not. If he's out there, if he goes full Joe Burrow, then we got the answer. He's the answer. If he gets hurt and misses half the season and he's 58% completion percentage and he gets worse, well, then maybe we have our answer. Is there a chance at the end of the year that we don't know if Will Levis is still like the long-term answer, $200 million guy in 3 years?
I mean, it would suck if they don't have a strong feeling one way or the other after this year. I think my feeling is a little different than yours in terms of I think they'll have a good feeling, and I think you need to have a good feeling after 2 years. I just think the strong feeling might be that he's like 12th in the league, and then you've got to decide: can you be a Super Bowl contender with the 12th quarterback in the league, who's going to have some really big Sundays when he's really dialed in, and the matchup is good, and the receivers get free, and there are 3 big plays, and some Sundays where there aren't, and he's not. And I think that puts you in the in between, which is where the Titans have lived a good percentage of their life.
The more things change,
and so then you're making a decision on the in between. You like the moxie, you like the quick release, you like the strength of the arm, but do those other things progress enough, the decision making and the accuracy? He's set up to make progress in those departments now. Everybody's optimistic at this stage of the year in almost every market about their question that's comparable to the Levis question in Nashville. And Jason McDonald here in the comments is a smart comment where he says not having your answer is part of the answer. But I think they get the answer. It's just, and it's a good answer, but it's not a great answer. And so, then I know some fans will say, well, you got to scrap that and you got to chase to get a guy who's top 3 or top 5. And other people will say, well, you can win with that. That'll be good enough. Can you win with that when you're going against Mahomes, when you're going against Allen, when you're going against Burrow?
Lamar.
Lamar. I don't know. And maybe it turns out better than I think, but maybe I'm just stuck with what I think he is right now a little bit.
Well, and I deal with this in my family because my family, they're all Packers shareholders, and they are all off their rockers about Jordan Love. And maybe I'm just the cynical asshole who's like, just because you had one great season after sitting for 3 years and you guys played a good second half of the season doesn't mean that you can replicate it all, or that you could win a Super Bowl, or that you're good enough to, consistently win divisions every year, which I think should be the goal for Will Levis. I don't think Super Bowl is not how you grade a quarterback. Ultimately, I know that's what you get paid to do, but putting a consistent product on the field every Sunday that is a winning, competitive, challenging for the division most years, like that's how you define success, and that's not how fans want to organize all the things in charts in their brains.
Yeah, and I know Love is ahead of Levis on the time continuum. But I haven't watched him nearly as closely as you have, but I kind of have that same feeling. He's 8th to 12th.
Yep.
And is that going to be good enough, especially for a fan base that is used to, first to third? probably even if the team, the franchise decides it's good enough, the fan base is never going to be satisfied with that.
Well, look, here's the deal. This is one of the most interesting years because we talked about the change, we talked about the culture, we talked about the evolution. I'm curious if you agree that soft is such a cliche term, but I now have daughters. I have kids now that I am treating very differently than I got treated when I was a kid. And I'm curious if you think there's any truth to sort of the Vrabel style, the disciplinarian style, or is this just a regular old pendulum swinging back because Brian Callahan and Rand Carthon communicate in a very different way than previous regimes? Is there actually something to the NFL player coming into the league now is different? Again, I'm just using it as a parent now. I know that the generations are like, that's sort of the point of evolution, right? Is to have a generation that is smarter and more evolved than the previous one. But that means they're looking at football differently as well, right?
Well, I think there's some things that Vrabel did. I think he's somewhat cast as a little bit too old school. Like, didn't they have shorter meetings? And he certainly emphasized that, like, a guy was free to call him and say, "Hey, boss, I got shit going on at home, and I'm not going to be present if I'm there on time today. I got to deal with some stuff." And he was always saying, "You tell me that, and I'm going to always tell you to take care of that stuff," which seemed to me to be the compassionate, serving head coach type, not the hard ass that so many people want to portray him to be because of his media personality. And so I think he was there on some of that stuff. Now, do I think Callahan is a softer, not negative use of the word softer, but a softer type? Yes. But I think Callahan's going to get in people's faces when it's called for. So I think people want to paint too stark a contrast there. But
that's not what I was trying to do, by the way, because one of the things I learned being out there is that Vrabel's ability to build a relationship. Every new free agent that came in, I would immediately go to them on the practice field and say, what is different about Mike Vrabel? And they would, to a person for years, say, "I've never been anywhere where someone built a relationship with me one-on-one, no matter what." And that's the stuff you're talking about.
Right. Now, I think once Mike Vrabel felt you crossed him in some way, shape, or form, or disappointed him crossing a line that maybe players didn't always know what that line was, then you were really a problem, in trouble, and it's hard to get back. And I think a lot of guys didn't know how to get back. And some of those guys were hurt guys that didn't play hurt or didn't recover fast enough or stuff like that. And that's where things got complicated. I hope and I expect that things will be smoother there, where maybe if a guy gets a little bit sideways with his coach or whatever, he's able to deal with that with Brian Callahan in a different way and not be dead to him, which is stuff that happened with Vrabel very, very clearly. Now, I don't know. I think that to use an example, Drew Rosenhaus, to me, and from my reporting, absolutely ruined Pierre Tart. And would Brian Callahan have had a better success with Pierre Tart? I don't know. I mean, Pierre Tart's dealing with Terrell Williams, who's a pretty good relationship guy also. Yeah. And the Titans needed Pierre Tart, and they lost him along the way there. So that's another thing we're going to see on kind of a case-by-case basis and get a general feel over time, how those relationships work and what the general vibe is there. Mm. But is the whole place a softer place? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I got one more question for you, but again, paulkuharsky.com is the website, of course. Sinkers Beverages, Kingston Group, the Paul Kuharsky podcast as well. Zach will be back, of course, next week. You can get to him, football and other F words, stack in the inbox. If you're going to place a wager on some of those over-unders you're talking about, where should they do it, PK?
They should do it at Zen Sports. Head over there, download the app, use the code TNPaul, bet at least $10 on your first bet, and you get a free year subscription to paulkuharsky.com if you don't already, for some reason, have one.
And if you're on the YouTube, give us a little thumbs up there. Give us a subscription. You can go over to PK's YouTube page as well. Give him a subscription as well. You can also rate, review, subscribe, all the stuff you get asked to do on the podcast feed. We do appreciate you there. Twitter and Facebook, if you're watching there, give us a share and tell folks about the product. We do really appreciate it. So my last one is, I think, one of the most important questions for this entire organization and fan base, and it's almost, we may never get an answer no matter what happens, or maybe we do in 2 years. And that is, some of these quarterbacks and coaches in the Titans history were not always like by choice marriages, right? You got Vince Young that was sort of forced on Jeff Fisher to some degree. Certainly Marcus Mariota was already drafted when Mike Vrabel got here. So there's been this sort of coach and quarterback didn't come in together, right? Like they weren't always. And I think ultimately, what does Brian Callahan think of Will Levis? And I don't mean like in some outlandish hot take radio kind of way. I mean, like, truly, that is the thing we don't like. Ultimately, might be the most important question of this current organization. And I don't know when we're going to find out, unless they do something drastic at the end of the season, like an extension, or he's bad and they decide to move on. I don't know if we're going to find out for a while.
Well, I think it depends on performance and how he executes a playbook and game plans that are tailored to what Brian Callahan, Nick Holtz, and an offensive staff believe are Levis's strengths. So I don't think it really matters what he thought about him before. He inherits him and now has to make the most of him. The thing is that there's kind of a built-in out, right? For all of these coaches that inherit a guy who isn't, quote unquote, their guy. If he's good and he takes you somewhere, he becomes your guy. And if he's not, well, I did the best I could with him, but it didn't work out. And now at some point here, I need to get my guy. And he was Rand's guy. So, it kind of works for you either way. The one way is way better if it works and he does well. And certainly Callahan, has been forthcoming about it. It makes perfect sense. He sees the same things we see. Quick release, great arm, the personality that's well suited for a starting quarterback in the league, accountability, that bounce and the leadership qualities. I mean, Levis, you and I have been around him. He's a great guy to be around.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine him not being great in the locker room and not being great in the huddle and not being a great guy to get the receivers together and do the work and all of that stuff. And that's one of the things that makes him easy to root for. I said this on the radio the other day. I don't have too much of a rooting interest in too many guys, but I'm kind of rooting for Will Levis, not for the Callahan stuff, but because the national people are so down on him and they just presume failure for him in this situation, that I'd like to watch the national reaction if they actually had to write about him being a success story here.
That's not what would happen. They would be like, I told you so, right?
Yeah. Well, two of them would. Charles Robinson likes him, and Pete Prisco has loved him since the beginning. Said he was the best quarterback in that draft class. And so I'd like to watch those guys take victory laps while seeing how the rest of the guys react. And we all know, I mean, I'm not taking receipts, but nobody likes this idea. And there's this silly narrative that you guys have discussed it. We've all discussed it. Like, why are the Titans making all these moves when their quarterback's Will Levis? Like, how dare you build up a program around a quarterback that we haven't crowned as the next great? And even if he's not, even if Will Levis falls flat on his face this year, why is it bad for a team to build up a team around whoever its quarterback is or will be in the future? It's just some nonsensical bullshit that's been written and said about this team. So anything that highlights that nonsensical BS will be fun for me to watch. And then when I get calls and you get calls to do national radio appearances, I can say nonsensical BS and it'll be fun.
Yeah, nothing better than a PK versus national media feud. I'm on board with that.
This is national.
Yeah,
It sounded like you said versus Nashville. I'll have
no,
Yeah,
national. Although the other person that usually sits with me on this show also was a hashtag Never Levis guy. So just want to point that out. That's
well, you're allowed to change your mind.
Absolutely.
And here's the thing: like, I didn't love Levis coming out. But I don't inspect the prospects the way you guys do. I'm not a college football guy. But once a guy shows up here, you take the dry erase board and you wipe it clean, and then you say, all right, now what?
And I will say, I know he's kind of become a caricature of himself a little bit because he's been doing it for so long. But because he is also one of the nicest human beings I've ever worked with in any line of work, Mel Kiper thought Will Levis was basically the number one overall quarterback. Like, he had Will Levis.
There's a third one.
He had Levis extremely high. We had an interview with him on Lamestream Sports. You can go listen to it and get the receipts. I said, why did you value this way? And he laid out all the injury history at Kentucky. And when he struggled, it was because of the injury stuff, and why he liked who he was and his family and his background and his master's degree and like all this stuff. And he just, like, he's one of the few, I agree, that was way higher on him. But to suggest if you ever see Will Levis in person, and I realize not fans don't get to do this, but if you've ever stood next to him, like, there's just no way you can look at him and be like, I don't know, probably not an NFL player. Like, he is constructed out of like thin air to be a quarterback in the NFL. It doesn't mean he's going to be good, but like, if you look, like, Blaine Gabbert looked this way too on a practice field, right? Like, looked like he was.
You love eye tests.
I do. I'm just
gaga. Like,
all right, stop it. That's not what I'm saying.
You need to be around football teams more.
What I'm saying is that what I mean is that if you were ever around a football player and you look at Will Levis, you're not going to be like, oh, I don't know if that guy can't hack. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, he is built like a transformer. He is not built the same way as other quarterbacks. So doesn't mean he's good.
You need to put your sunglasses on when you're around these guys. You're so starstruck.
Oh, I'm not starstruck.
I'd like to see you next to a movie star.
Get me, because they're too little. I would dwarf all those people. Get me around Robert Plant, and I might.
I once resisted saying hello to Robert Plant at Nashville, where I respected the Nashville code and watched him eat from a distance and didn't do anything.
What did he? What was he like? That's one of the few things I might violate.
He had an omelet.
He might be the one guy if I saw Jimmy Page like walking through East Nashville, I might just go talk to him. I don't know. I might not.
Well, walking through, you're allowed to approach, but during a meal, you're not allowed to approach.
I think that's a good rule. PK, tell everybody where they can find you real quickly.
PaulKuharsky.com. Pretty simple. Check it out. Don't miss it. Lots of fun going on over there. And I'm part of the 440 network with Braden here, who consistently provides excellent content. Find myself tuning in too often during the day, which slows down my own work.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Paul. Sinkers Beverages, Kingston Group as well. We do appreciate you guys for your support. All you guys in the comments, thank you so much for being here. We do appreciate all of you for hanging out. Otherwise, have a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys on Monday.